It's wild how life comes full circle, right? I never thought I'd be sharing this story here, but after everything that's happened, this feels like the only place I can actually get it all out without going nuts. So here goes. I remember the day my parents sat me and my sister Leah down to tell us they were getting divorced. I was only 8 at the time, and Leah was 10, but even at that age, you can tell when things are falling apart. Leah tried to act tough, like she didn't care, but I could tell she was barely holding it together. We both were. Of course, they gave us the whole "it's not your fault" speech, like somehow that would make it hurt less. Spoiler alert, it didn't. After the divorce, life was rough. We stayed with Mom, and she did her best to keep things going. But honestly, it was obvious she was struggling. She worked long hours, came home exhausted, and we didn't really spend time together anymore. It felt like we went from being a family to just 3 people living in the same house. And I guess when Dad left, he took all the glue that held us together. A couple of years went by, and then came Matt. I didn't pay much attention at first. I mean, I was just a kid, and we weren't exactly involved in Mom's dating life. Then one day, out of nowhere, she introduced us to him over dinner. Matt seemed fine. He was a nice enough guy, but awkward, like he didn't know how to talk to kids. I remember sitting there watching him, trying to figure out what Mom saw in him. But the real game changer wasn't Matt. It was his son, Ben. Ben was barely a year old when Mom started seeing Matt, and for whatever reason, she instantly became obsessed with this kid. I'm talking full-on, around-the-clock mom mode. She treated him like her own son, which, let me tell you, was weird as hell. It felt like she hit the reset button on her parenting. Meanwhile, Leah and I were standing there, watching it all go down, thinking, where was all this energy when we needed it? It didn't take long for Mom and Matt to get serious. She kept talking about how we were all going to be one big family, how this was the next chapter for us. But here's the thing. No one asked us how we felt about it. Leah was old enough to be pissed, but I was just confused. One minute it's me, Leah, and Mom, and the next it's like we've been dragged into this whole new life with Matt and Ben, whether we liked it or not. When they got engaged, things only got weirder. I remember how excited Mom was, like marrying Matt was the best thing that had ever happened to her. She started planning the wedding immediately, and of course didn't really ask what we thought. It felt like we were just along for the ride, and our opinions didn't matter. Then, right before the wedding, Dad died. A car accident, and honestly, it wrecked us. Leah was a mess, and I didn't know how to deal with it either. Dad wasn't around much after the divorce, but he was still our dad. Losing him hurt, badly. You'd think under the circumstances that Mom would postpone the wedding, right? Maybe give us time to grieve? Nope. The wedding went ahead like nothing had happened. I'll never forget how cold that felt. While Leah and I were still barely keeping it together, Mom was smiling, talking about flowers and wedding venues. The day of the wedding was surreal. There we were, just weeks after losing our dad, standing there in these uncomfortable clothes, watching Mom marry Matt. Neither of us said a word the whole day. It was like we were trapped in some weird, alternate reality. That's when the real shift happened. After the wedding, Mom dropped a bomb on us. She told us that if we wanted to keep seeing Dad's parents, our grandparents, we'd have to include Ben. Yep. She said that if we wanted to spend time with our own family, we had to bring Matt's kid along. I swear, Leah almost lost it. She yelled at Mom for a solid 5 minutes, and honestly, I don't blame her. Mom's reasoning? We're a family now, and Ben is part of that. But here's the thing, Ben wasn't our family. He wasn't Dad's son. He had never even met Dad. Why did he need to be part of our time with Dad's side of the family? It didn't make sense to us, and no matter how much we tried to explain it, Mom just didn't care. After that, Leah and I started pulling away. We didn't want to be around this forced new family dynamic. It felt like Mom had made Ben her priority, and we were just these leftover kids she had to deal with. Little by little, we were being pushed out of her life, and there wasn't much we could do about it. Looking back now, I can see that was the beginning of the end for our relationship with Mom. She was so focused on building this new life with Matt and Ben that she didn't even notice we were slipping away. Or maybe she did and just didn't care. Either way, things were never the same after that. After Mom and Matt got married, things got even more awkward between us. It was like she expected Leah and me to just magically adjust to this new life, like we were supposed to pretend everything was fine and suddenly feel like one big happy family. Spoiler, we didn't. Not even close. Mom started pushing this whole family unity thing hard. She kept going on and on about how we needed to treat Ben like he was our little brother. But that just didn't feel right. Ben wasn't our brother. He wasn't Dad's kid. He was just Matt's son, and no matter how much Mom pushed, it wasn't going to change how we felt. I remember one specific day that really hit me hard. It was Dad's birthday. Even after the divorce, Leah and I would spend the day with Dad's family, our grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. It was our way of keeping his memory alive, visiting his favorite spots and sharing stories. It was always a special day for us, something that helped us feel connected to him. But this year, Mom had different plans. A week before Dad's birthday, she sat us down and said, "This year we're celebrating your dad's birthday at home, with Matt and Ben." I felt my stomach drop. What? That day had always been about Dad and the family that knew him. Ben didn't even know who Dad was. He wasn't part of those memories. Leah, being Leah, didn't hold back. "Why does Ben have to be there?" she asked, clearly annoyed. "This has nothing to do with him." Mom's response? "Ben is part of this family now, and it's important we honor your father together. We don't exclude people in this family." I was speechless. We'd been having this same fight for months, and no matter what we said, Mom always twisted it into us being selfish or cold-hearted. It wasn't about excluding Ben, it was about keeping something sacred. This was our time to remember Dad, and we didn't want to turn it into some awkward, blended family thing, but of course Mom didn't see it that way. So, we gave up. Arguing was pointless. We figured it was better to just go along with it and do our own thing later. But man, that day was rough. On Dad's birthday, Mom cooked a big dinner and we all sat around the table, pretending like everything was normal. Brian tried to make conversation about Dad, which was cringy because he barely knew him. I sat there staring at my plate, just counting down the minutes until I could leave. Meanwhile, Ben, completely oblivious to what was going on, was running around being a typical 3-year-old. I didn't blame him. It wasn't his fault. But it still felt wrong that he was there. Then, to top it all off, Mom pulled out a birthday cake with "Happy Birthday, Dad" written on it. She made us all stand around, including Ben, and sing happy birthday. It felt so forced, so fake. I barely moved my mouth to sing, trying to keep it together. It was like she was rewriting history, forcing this narrative that Ben and Brian were somehow part of Dad's life when they never were. Leah had it worse. She couldn't handle it. Halfway through the night, she stormed out of the house, and honestly, I didn't blame her one bit. I stayed behind, mostly to avoid making things even more dramatic, but I wished I had left with her. After that birthday disaster, things only went downhill. Mom kept trying to shove Ben into more and more of our traditions, and every time we pushed back, she'd accuse us of being heartless. She'd say stuff like, "Ben is just a little boy, how can you be so cruel to him?" But that wasn't the point. It wasn't about Ben. It was about how she was erasing Dad's memory and replacing it with this new life she was building. That's when it really hit me. This wasn't just about blending families. It was about control. Mom wanted to control how we remembered Dad. She wanted to control how we lived and how we fit into this new version of her life. If we didn't fall in line, we were the bad guys. Looking back, I realized I was angry. Angry at her for forcing Ben into everything, angry at Brian for just going along with it, and angry at myself for not standing up to her more. But what could I do? I was just a kid, trying to hold on to the little bit of my old life that was left. And the more I tried to hold on, the more it felt like it was slipping away. That year changed everything. Leah and I distanced ourselves from Mom and her new family. While it wasn't the official breaking point, it was definitely the beginning of us realizing that things were never going back to the way they were. As the years passed, things just kept getting worse. By the time I was 18, I'd pretty much had enough. The house didn't even feel like my home anymore. It felt like Brian had taken over and everything revolved around him and Ben. Every decision, every rule, it was always Brian says this or Brian thinks that. It was like I didn't exist in my own home. Don't get me wrong, Brian wasn't a bad guy. He never mistreated us or anything. But he wasn't my dad, and I didn't care about his opinions. I just wanted my old life back. where my opinions actually mattered, where Leah and I weren't just sidelined in favor of this new life Mom had created. One day, while I was packing up some stuff in my room, getting ready to move out, Mom came in. She could tell from the boxes that I was serious about leaving. I'd been planning to move in with my girlfriend Jess for months now. We'd talked about it for a while, and I was finally ready to go. It wasn't that I didn't love my mom, I did, but I needed space. The house felt suffocating, and I couldn't take it anymore. "So, you're really going through with this?" Mom asked, crossing her arms, her voice cold. "Yeah, Mom, it's time," I said, not even looking up from the box I was packing. She stood there for a moment, watching me, and then sighed, shaking her head. "I don't understand why you're running away from your family." That word, family, hit me like a punch. I stopped what I was doing, turned to her and said, "I'm not running away from family, Mom, but this doesn't feel like my family anymore." The look on her face changed, like I'd just slapped her. "What are you talking about? Of course this is your family. We're all in this together." I couldn't believe she still didn't get it. After everything that had happened, she still thought we were this happy little unit. But we weren't. "Ever since you married Brian, everything's been about him and Ben. It's like Leah and I don't even matter anymore. You're trying to replace Dad with them, and I can't deal with it." Mom's face hardened. "I'm not trying to replace your father. I just want us to be a family. Why can't you see that?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "It's not that I don't want a family, Mom. It's that this doesn't feel like a real family. I feel like I'm stuck in someone else's life." She looked like she was about to argue again, but then she sighed and sat down on the edge of my bed. "I just want you to be happy," she said quietly. "I want us all to be happy." "I know, Mom," I said, softening a little. "But I'm not happy here. I need space. I need to figure things out on my own." We sat there in silence for a few moments. I could tell she didn't want me to go, but she knew I had made up my mind. After a while, she stood up and left the room without saying another word. I went back to packing, feeling a mix of guilt and relief. I didn't want to hurt her, but I also couldn't keep living like that. I needed to get out. Moving in with Jess was the best decision I'd made in years. For the first time in a long time, I had my own space, a place where I could be myself without all the drama. Jess was incredibly supportive. She knew what I was going through with Mom and was always there to listen when I needed to vent. Life with her felt like a breath of fresh air. But of course, it didn't stay peaceful for long. A week after I moved out, Mom called. She wasn't happy. She said I wasn't around enough to see Ben and that I was hurting him by not being more involved in his life. I couldn't believe it. Even after I'd left, she was still pushing the whole "Ben is your brother" narrative. It wasn't that I hated the kid. I didn't. But I didn't see him as my brother, and I wasn't going to pretend I did just to make her feel better. I tried to explain that I needed space, that I was focusing on my own life now, but she didn't want to hear it. She kept going on about how I was abandoning the family and that I was being cruel to Ben. The guilt trips were relentless, but I wasn't caving this time. I had finally gotten out, and I wasn't going back. Things stayed tense for months. I rarely went back to the house, and when I did, it was always awkward. Leah had already started distancing herself, too. She wasn't as vocal about it as I was, but I knew she felt the same way. It was like we were being slowly phased out of Mom's life, and Ben was taking our place. It hurt, but what could we do? Mom had made her choice, and we had made ours. Then, out of nowhere, Mom showed up at my job. I was in the middle of a shift when I saw her walking in, looking furious. I wasn't sure what had set her off this time, but I had a feeling I was about to find out. "We need to talk," she said, arms crossed and glaring at me. I sighed. "Mom, I'm at work. Can't this wait?" "No, it can't," she snapped. "I'm tired of you ignoring your family. Here we go again." "I'm not ignoring my family," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I've just been busy." "Busy? Too busy to see your own brother?" she shot back. I clenched my jaw. "Ben is not my brother. That did it." Mom's face turned red, and I could see her hands shaking with anger. "How dare you say that? I raised him like my own son. He is your brother, and you're treating him like he doesn't even exist." I had had enough. I wasn't going to let her guilt me into something I didn't believe. "Look, I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for you to remarry or bring Ben into our lives. I'm not saying I hate him, but he's not my brother. and I don't have to include him in my life if I don't want to." Mom just stood there, staring at me like I was a stranger. "I can't believe you've turned into this person," she said, her voice low and full of disappointment. "I thought I raised you better than this. I didn't know what else to say." I looked her in the eye and said, "Maybe you didn't raise me at all." After that confrontation with Mom at my job, things between us went from bad to worse. I didn't think they could, but here we were. The tension had been building for years, but now it felt like we were in a cold war. She wasn't talking to me, and I wasn't making any effort to reach out either. It felt like something had broken, something that couldn't be fixed, and honestly, I didn't have the energy to try and mend it anymore. A couple of weeks went by, and I thought maybe we'd just leave things where they were, silent and distant. I didn't mind the silence. In fact, it was kind of a relief. I finally had some space to focus on my own life without all that family drama weighing me down. Jess and I were settling into our new place, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. But of course, Mom wasn't going to let things stay quiet for long. She had a way of pulling you back in, whether you wanted to be involved or not. One night, I was at home with Jess, just relaxing after a long day when my phone started buzzing with text after text. It was Mom. She hadn't texted me since our fight, so I knew this wasn't going to be anything good. I didn't even want to open them at first, but the notifications kept coming, so I finally gave in. The texts were long, really long. Like, I had to scroll for a minute to get through them all. Mom was ranting about how I'd abandoned the family and how Ben was constantly asking where I was and why I wasn't visiting anymore. She went on about how I was hurting him by not being around and accused me of being cruel to a little kid who had done nothing wrong. I just sat there staring at my phone, completely drained. It was the same argument all over again. She couldn't accept that I didn't see Ben as my brother and refused to let it go. Now, she was framing me as some sort of villain for not playing along with her perfect family fantasy. I didn't even know how to respond. Jess was sitting next to me and must have seen the look on my face. "Is it your mom again?" she asked, concerned. I nodded. "Yeah, she's saying the same stuff, that I'm being unfair to Ben and hurting the family." Jess rolled her eyes. "She still doesn't get it, does she?" "Nope," I said, tossing my phone onto the table. "She's never going to get it." Jess put her hand on my shoulder. "You don't owe her anything. You've done everything you could to explain how you feel. If she doesn't want to listen, that's on her." I knew she was right. I'd spent years trying to make Mom understand, but it never seemed to matter. Still, that guilt was always there, lurking in the back of my mind. I didn't want to hurt Ben, and I didn't want to make him feel left out. But at the same time, I couldn't keep pretending like everything was normal. A few days later, things took a turn. Mom started calling me, and I ignored the first couple of calls, figuring she was just going to push the same argument. But then, she left a voicemail that caught me off guard. In the voicemail, she wasn't just upset, she was angry. Like, really angry. Her voice was shaking, and she said something along the lines of, "If you want to be part of this family, you need to step up and stop acting like a child. Ben is your brother, whether you like it or not, and if you keep ignoring him, you're going to lose your family. You're better than this, Lucas. I didn't raise you to be so selfish." That last part really got under my skin. Selfish? I had spent years trying to keep the peace, bending over backward to make things work, to balance what I needed with what she wanted. And now I was being called selfish because I didn't want to play along anymore? It felt like nothing I'd done mattered. All she cared about was Ben and the family she had built around him. Later that night, I played the voicemail for Jess. She shook her head, frustrated. "She's trying to guilt-trip you again," she said. "You don't have to listen to that." I knew she was right. Mom had been using guilt to manipulate me for years, but it was like a reflex now. No matter how much I tried to distance myself, part of me still felt like I owed her something, even when she was clearly in the wrong. A few days passed, and then something happened that really pushed me over the edge. Mom showed up at Jess's apartment. No call, no text, just showed up at the door demanding to talk. Jess opened the door, and I could hear Mom's voice before I even saw her. She was upset, and she wasn't going to leave until she got what she wanted. Jess came back to get me, looking a little shaken. "Your mom's here," she said quietly. Well, she's kind of freaking out. I didn't want to deal with it. I really didn't. But I couldn't just leave her standing out there either, so I went to the door. The second Mom saw me, she started in. "We need to talk, now," she said, her voice sharp. I didn't even invite her in. I just stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "What do you want, Mom?" She crossed her arms and glared at me. "You need to stop this. This is ridiculous, Lucas. You've cut off your own family for no reason." "I didn't cut off my family," I said, trying to stay calm. "I just don't want to be part of something that doesn't feel real." Mom threw her hands up in frustration. "Ben is real. Brian is real. This is your family, whether you want to accept it or not." "I don't care about that," I shot back. "You're trying to force something that I don't believe in. Ben isn't my brother, and Brian isn't my dad. I'm not going to pretend like they are just to make you happy." That's when she said it. The thing that really pushed me over the edge. "Well, if you can't accept them as family, then maybe you don't deserve to be part of this family either." I stood there staring at her, trying to process what she had just said. I couldn't believe it. She was willing to throw me away because I wouldn't fall in line with her new version of family. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just turned around and walked back inside, closing the door behind me. I could hear her shouting outside, but I didn't care anymore. Something had snapped inside me. All the guilt, all the pressure, it was gone. If she wanted to cut me off, fine. I wasn't going to keep fighting for a place in a family that didn't feel like mine. That night, I blocked her number. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. For the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. After I blocked Mom's number, things went quiet, really quiet. I thought maybe she'd try to get in touch through other people, maybe Jess, maybe Emma, but nothing. It was like a switch had flipped, and just like that, the drama stopped. At first, it felt weird. I'd been so used to the constant pressure, the guilt trips, and the manipulation that when it all stopped, I didn't know what to do with myself. But slowly, the silence started to feel like a relief. I spent more time with Jess, focusing on our life together. For once, I wasn't carrying around all this weight from my family. Jess and I could actually enjoy our time without me constantly checking my phone or stressing about the latest thing my mom had done or said. It felt like I was finally living my own life and not the one she had tried to force me into. But of course, peace never lasts forever. One day, a few months after everything went down, I got a message from my aunt. Mom's sister. I hadn't spoken to her in a while, but we'd always gotten along pretty well. She hadn't taken sides during all the drama with Mom, which I appreciated. The message was short and kind of vague. It just said, "Hey, can we talk? It's important." I knew something was up, so I called her. She answered on the first ring, and the first thing she said was, "Lucas, have you talked to your mom lately?" I sighed. "No, I haven't. We're not really in contact anymore." There was a pause on the other end. I could tell she was trying to figure out how to word whatever she was about to say. "Well, I don't want to get in the middle of things, but you should probably know that your mom's been telling everyone that you and Emma abandoned her and Ben." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Here we go again. "She's saying we abandoned her?" I asked, my voice tight. "Yeah," my aunt said softly. "She's telling people that she tried to reach out to you both, but you've been ignoring her, that you're refusing to be part of the family and she doesn't know what to do." I couldn't help it. I laughed, even though none of this was funny. Of course she was the victim now. Classic. "I don't know all the details, Lucas," my aunt said, her voice a little defensive. "I'm just telling you what she's been saying." "I appreciate you letting me know," I said, feeling my anger start to build again. "But she's twisting the truth. She cut us off the second we didn't play by her rules. She wanted us to accept Ben as family, and when we didn't, she wrote us off." There was a long pause on her end, like she wasn't sure how to respond. Finally, she said, "Well, I thought you should hear it from me rather than through the grapevine." "Thanks for letting me know," I said, trying to keep my frustration out of my voice. "But honestly, I don't think there's anything left to fix." After I hung up the phone, I sat there for a while, just thinking. It was hard to wrap my head around the fact that, after everything, Mom was still trying to make us out to be the bad guys. It was like she couldn't handle the idea that she'd pushed us away, so instead, she flipped the script and made it look like we were the ones who had abandoned her. That's when I realized something. This wasn't about Ben or Brian or any of the family drama. This was about control. Mom had always needed to be in control of everything. She needed to control the narrative, control the family dynamic, control how we remembered Dad. And when Emma and I stopped letting her control us, she lost it. A few days after the call with my aunt, I decided to reach out to Emma. We hadn't talked much since everything blew up, but I knew she was going through the same stuff I was. We set up a time to meet for coffee, and when we finally sat down, it was like a weight lifted off my shoulders. Talking to her felt different now, like we were on the same page in a way we hadn't been before. "I talked to Aunt Sarah," I said after we'd settled into our seats. Emma raised an eyebrow. "Yeah? What did she say?" I told her about the conversation, about how Mom was telling people we'd abandoned her. Emma rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. "Of course she's playing the victim," Emma said. "She always does. It's never her fault." "I know," I said, shaking my head, "but it still pisses me off. How can she not see that she did this? She's the one who pushed us away." "She doesn't want to see it," Emma said, taking a sip of her coffee. "She's never going to admit she's wrong. In her mind, she's this perfect mom who's just trying to hold the family together, and we're the ungrateful kids who don't appreciate her." That hit me harder than I expected. Perfect mom. Was that how she saw herself? I guess it made sense. In her world, she probably thought she was doing everything right, that she was creating this happy, blended family. But the reality was so far from that. "I don't know what to do anymore," I admitted, leaning back in my chair. "I've tried everything. I've explained how I feel. I've tried setting boundaries and nothing works. She just ignores it and keeps pushing her version of things." Emma nodded. "Same here. I've been trying to distance myself for years, but every time I do, she pulls the poor me card and makes me feel guilty." We sat in silence for a while, both of us just processing everything. It felt good to talk to Emma about it, though. It made me realize I wasn't alone in all this. We were both dealing with the same thing, and neither of us had the answers. But at least we had each other. "I guess we just have to accept that this is who she is," Emma said finally. "She's not going to change. She's always going to try and control us, and we have to decide how much of that we're willing to put up with." I nodded. "Yeah, I guess so." We finished our coffee, and as we left the cafe, I felt a weird sense of closure. I wasn't happy about how things had turned out with Mom, but I wasn't as angry anymore. I had done everything I could to make things work, but sometimes, no matter how hard you try, people just won't change. And that's not on you, Dot. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could move forward without the weight of all this family drama on my shoulders. Maybe things with Mom would never be the way they used to be, but I had my own life to live now, and I wasn't going to let her control that anymore.